Happy Monday. This is Catherine Watson, and I am with the Life After 50 show. This is a show that I created this year back in February. So it's been almost a year that we've been having Life After 50 shows. And every week we bring a different guest on, somebody that's going to help you with your life after 50. And those of you who have reached that magic age, you know that life changes. A lot of things happen. For many of us, caring for an aging parent may be part of that mix, or maybe it's a spouse that's getting older and having health issues. Whatever it is, we're going to bring you information to help you with those journeys. Next week, we're going to have a guest on that will be speaking about job challenges after 50. But today we're going to be focused on our seniors and their families. And I've got a really exciting guest today. I'm really excited to have Greg on. He's been on the show before, but we're going to bring Greg Shelley into the show today. Greg is going to be talking to us about seniors' rights, seniors and the families that love them, about the rights they have when they have a loved one in a skilled facility, a nursing home, a rehabilitation center, or an assisted living facility. What kind of rights do you have? Who you should contact? Why an ombudsman is a great first step to getting the answers and getting correct information. What I love about the ombudsman is they are true advocates. They are not paid by some company that wants to steer you in their direction. They are advocates for seniors and their families to help them navigate this often confusing world of nursing homes and assisted livings and rehabilitation centers. And as we enter the holiday season, unfortunately, it seems to be a time that a lot of seniors end up in the hospital. Flu season comes on, there's falls, there's just a lot of things that seem to happen. Families also come together during this time, and you may visit mom and realize that there's some problems going on and she needs some more assistance, and you're not sure where to go or what to do. Listen to this show and listen to the Life After 50 show. We'll try to guide you and give you the tools and the information that you need. So now I'm going to bring Greg up, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you what an ombudsman is and why you need to connect with one if you have somebody in one of these facilities. Greg, come on up to the show. And there he is. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Fantastic. Good morning, Catherine.
Great to have you on. Well, you're welcome. Thanks for being on. Happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about the Ombudsman program here in Texas. And I know it's nationwide. Some people may be watching from other areas of the country. Probably most of our visitors or our listeners are from Texas. But tell us about the Ombudsman program and how it works.
Well, like you said, happy Monday. I'm coming to you from UT, the Cizik School of Nursing at UT Health, who runs the Harris County Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, and I'm the managing ombudsman for that program. So happy to be here with you again and get a chance to talk about one of my favorite subjects, resident rights in the long-term care facilities, in particularly assisted living and nursing home. And as you said, we're advocates for the folks who live in nursing homes and assisted living. And as long as they're on the same page with their family, we're advocates for the families as well. Biggest part of what we do is education and outreach, make sure folks know about their rights and options and make educated decisions going forward. And when they need our actual help, we get involved. One of the best parts about it, in my opinion, is that all of our conversations with folks are confidential, and we cannot take any action unless we have the consent of the residents and or their legally authorized representatives. So it's a good chance to have a free consultation about things, get information, and then get to decide whether or not you need our help. And the way I distinguish the program itself, kind of in an informal way, is that I say if you wanted to try to get someone in trouble, of course you would call regulatory. And if you just want to try to fix a problem, you would call the ombudsman, because our interest is what their interest is. And that's usually just trying to get a problem fixed right there and then.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, a lot of times families get really upset. It's a very confusing time for families. And sometimes they may think that they just want to get somebody in trouble because they're angry and they're upset. But when they have a chance to sit down with an ombudsman, they're able to find solutions. And that's really the best outcome for everybody involved.
Right. I think a lot of it really comes down to miscommunication on both sides. Each perspective sometimes coming at each other from view, and we can sometimes try to get them on the same page as that, and so that the communication can resume. Sometimes folks come in with a cynical look at the institution, and they automatically assume the institution is trying to pull one over on them and trying to rip them off or trying to do them wrong. And on the other hand, the institutions had experience with individuals that might not have been forthcoming or honest with them in the past. So they sometimes assume the consumer is trying to pull one over on them. And that's where we can come in and help get communication rolling again, get back to the heart of whatever the problem is, find out the underlying issues, and maybe get everybody back in the right direction, trying to fix it for the resident.
Exactly. So, Greg, what are some of the issues that families come to you with? What are some of the problems that are common that you see a lot that we may be able to talk about and help people to understand and maybe even avoid?
I think early on in any of this process is the best time to get a hold of an ombudsman to kind of get a general overview of what long-term care is like, especially residential settings like assisted living and nursing homes. Talk about options, maybe even set up expectations, and describe different techniques and ways to go about getting the best possible individualized care in both of those types of settings. So when we get contacted before someone even needs care, we can help them understand all the possible options in their area and beyond. And that helps a lot because we do, like you said, visit all of the different facilities, and we have pretty familiar with what's available and what the differences are depending on what a person needs. One of the most common things I do run into, I talked to you about this earlier, is folks assuming just because mom or dad has dementia that they absolutely have to go to a nursing home. And that's not the case. There's some fantastic options in type B assisted living out there that folks are surprised to find out can also provide good care to folks with dementia, depending on what the other medical needs are, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I put together a list. I think you're aware of it on Find Houston Senior Care website for those residential type care homes, the smaller assisted living. So it gives people another option out there. I'm a huge fan of them. My mother-in-law lived in a small assisted living home, and it was the best fit for her. That said, it's not always the best fit for everybody. And sometimes people do better at home and they have enough of a support system at home to make it work. And that's key if you are thinking about bringing someone home, because let's face it, if you ask a senior 9 times out of 10, what are they going to tell you? They want to go home, right?
That's absolutely. And you hit on another big issue. I think we, as just a function of our busyness throughout the day, both on the institution side and as individuals, we try to get in a hurry, and that causes us to assume that what works for one person is going to work for another, and that's definitely not the case. Even when we're training new ombudsmen, one of my favorite answers to whenever someone asks a hypothetical question is it depends, because it really does depend on the individual and what they want.
Yes, it does. It does. And it depends on the whole family situation too, I've found. Because if you don't have the family support, then staying at home may not be the best option for you. You know, sometimes you need that extra support. Right at Home Houston is on the show today. Thanks for showing up. They said the role of an ombudsman is very important and a crucial role to help families. We agree with you, Right at Home. Thanks for coming on the show today. If anybody out there has any questions that they want to ask Greg, please feel free to write them in the comment section below. I'll bring them up on the screen and let Greg answer for you as best he can within our short period of time here. If you need more extensive help, he can help you get in touch with an ombudsman in your area. And I'm going to be putting up the website for that in just a moment too. So, Greg, let's talk about the rules and regulations. So a lot of people, I think, don't really understand that I think they know that nursing homes are regulated, but I don't think they realize that the assisted living, especially the smaller homes, are also regulated.
That's right. The key difference is that the nursing homes are regulated by a set of regulations from both federal and state entities. The assisted living currently is only under state regulations. So each individual state has their different rules surrounding it. There is some advocacy push trying to get a federal standard as well, which I do believe would be helpful. I know it's tough on some of the providers who consider themselves doing an excellent job at providing care, and they feel like they don't need the regulations, but they don't get to see the range and scope that we do as advocates visiting all of them. And there are some potential pitfalls with the existing ones. And I think even folks in the regulatory agency would tell you they wish they had, I guess, better enforceable rules when it comes to the assisted living side of things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can be confusing too from state to state. So if you've got somebody that's living in one state and they're going to move to an assisted living in Texas, and maybe they've been in Missouri and they're now moving closer to their family, and they can be very, very different, how they're run, how they're managed, the rules and regulations involving them, very, very different from state to state. And that can be hard on families that are trying to figure out best options.
And especially when it comes to assisted living, even though assisted living and nursing home both have a clearly delineated resident rights, which I think in experience, folks seem to think that just because you go into nursing home or assisted living, you somehow lose rights. When the reality is folks living there actually have more rights than we do, one of which includes the right to access an ombudsman. But, just I think having a little bit more oversight and enforcement in general helps bring up the overall quality of it from, bottom to the top. And the thing that folks really need to pay close attention to in assisted living is the admissions agreement, and make sure they understand what they're agreeing to, because in many cases, just like a lease in an apartment, that can help define or limit what you have a right to. And the thing that I really do enjoy about, the assisted living side of it in general, especially here in Harris County, is that fact that there's 292 of them. So there's lots of competition, but it's a big difference if you're talking at the lower end of cost versus the highest end of cost.
Right. And cost is not the only factor, though, because I've seen some really expensive places that just didn't have quite the care that a less expensive place had.
Right.
And one thing I always try to tell families is you're not buying ambience, you're buying care. When somebody goes into assisted living, you need to look at the care that's given. I always tell people, look at the smiles. If there's lots of smiles in the place, it's probably a pretty good place.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out what I just said. I was hopefully not trying to convey that price is everything. It's just that at the higher end, if you can afford one of those, you certainly have a lot more options than the folks who can only afford. So.
And you have the ability to say, well, I'm going to take my money elsewhere if they don't do how you want them to do. So at the lower end, you may not have as much option to do that.
That's leverage. Nice leverage at that end.
Absolutely. So Greg, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that families have when somebody is in a nursing home, for instance?
Well, I mean, I'll start with family dynamics themselves. In situations where parents haven't clearly delineated their wants and needs in advance and maybe had some tough discussions with families, it certainly can lead to some serious family conflict. And that's one of my most common themes, I think, in the assisted living world, where one sibling doesn't agree with what another sibling is trying to do. Um, and in other cases, the parents have clearly delineated which one is the decision maker or which one is it. And that still can create some, additional conflict between the two and within the facility. And it can be disruptive to care as well. So certainly stress the need to have those conversations early, define roles for future caregiving and decision making. It helps everybody along the way. But getting back to the basic part of the nursing home thing, I think that oftentimes what happens is folks learn everything the hard way. That's usually after someone has taken a fall and ended up in a hospital for more than 3 midnights and qualifies for the skilled nursing side of nursing home care. And that's the first time they've entered into a nursing home. And oftentimes the family and the resident, for that matter, don't even realize that they are in a nursing home because they're told they're going to a transitional care facility, even though, and that's true in terms of what the skilled nursing part of it does, but very often it is in fact a licensed nursing home. And that can be pretty shocking if that's the way they're finding out about it. And then they have to find out about all the limitations, both of the benefit itself, the skilled nursing part, and what the options are afterwards, because unfortunately not everyone regains their strength and independence and is able to return to the same setting they were in before. So that family communication is vital.
It is.
And sadly, it's not something you can always easily overcome because many of us carry those conflicts well into adulthood.
Yes, we do, don't we? That old sibling rivalry starts rearing its ugly head a lot of times in these situations. And, a lot of times it's everybody really wants to do the best thing. We just have different visions of what that best thing is. I know with my family, that was a situation. We all had different, very, very different beliefs on what was the best thing for mom. And that caused a lot of conflict. So, and sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes they don't, necessarily want the best thing. So it's important to have your ducks in a row before something does happen to you. And we'll be bringing on an elder law attorney later this month to talk about those kinds of issues.
Yeah, that's really important for those who can afford it. That elder care planning in the future, including financial planning, is vital because it's really difficult to get information otherwise without an experienced attorney. One thing I was going to point out, you reminded me of one of my favorite anecdotes about how sometimes families want something that the residents don't. And that's the nicest thing about our program is we have to have the consent of the resident as long as they're capable of making their own decisions. And literally that means until they've been incapacitated by adjudication. So very often I get calls from concerned family members who say my mom's not getting enough exercise or therapy. And then in one particular case, I was able to go meet someone living in an assisted living, and she was in her early 80s, and she had me in and was very hospitable, let me explain what I do and why I was there. And then she just kind of slumped down in her chair and said, "Greg, at what age do I get to quit exercising?" And I'd never really thought about it from that perspective, but I can certainly relate to that if you've been doing it. It's not necessarily fun or not necessarily something that you want to do. So in that case, I got permission to explain that point of view back to her family and let her know that I was there if she needed me in the future. Wasn't much more I could do. But it is very enjoyable part of the job, getting to meet so many different people from different walks of life. And as I say, primary goal for the ombudsman is just trying to be helpful to the families and the residents especially.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have plenty of volunteer opportunities, by the way. I'll drop that note.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
always in need of volunteers. Unfortunately, we're the biggest volunteer program in the state, and they do a fantastic job of making regular visits to the nursing homes, building relationships, effectively bringing change that benefits the entire facility and all the residents. It's very rewarding volunteer work. It's very rewarding paid work too for those fortunate of us that get to. Yeah.
So tell me about some of the programs that you've brought to some of the nursing homes.
It ranges from helping folks develop resident councils, family councils, even being additional set of eyes and ears in terms of identifying systemic problems for administrators. Of course, this is all with the residents' consent, but things that we think of that are kind of, it seems like, oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. But from the resident's perspective, it can be. When you live there all day, things like your 3 meals a day are very important. It's a big part of your day. And to have them completely not individualized to you, that's it's not the highest level of, respect and dignity that we can provide. When sometimes the changes are very subtle. It could be something as simple as, I would like to have some hot sauce like I do at home. And we work through those situations. I think a lot of times the administrators are the last to know what's going on with any individual resident. And a lot of times the residents themselves, they'll say they don't want to cause any trouble. And a lot of their concerns are not really the type that's going to cause any trouble. So we can help them work through that if they give us the permission.
Okay. Greg, I just thought of something that I had a situation a while back. A friend of mine's mother was in a nursing home on Medicaid, and she was diabetic. Had some dementia, had quite a lot of dementia. She was given, my friend went in to visit her one day, and she was appalled when she walked in. She was sitting down eating an ice cream sundae. And she was furious. And she went to the nursing staff and said, "What are you doing? My mother's diabetic." And they said, "Well, she wanted it and we couldn't deny her. We don't have the right to deny her," is what they told her. And they would keep continuing to feed her these sweets. Well, lo and behold, guess what? Her mom ended up in the hospital time and time again because they kept giving her these sweets. Where are the rights there? And who has the right to say, this is ridiculous?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I think two of the things I'll point out for folks is to understand that in assisted living, the key part for individualized care comes in what's called a service plan. And in nursing homes, it's the care planning. And the care planning is supposed to be done shortly within being admitted, and then quarterly or upon any significant change in condition. But a lot of times families are struggling with issues and don't realize they have a right to call a care plan meeting at any time. Doesn't mean you're going to get it in 24 hours or anything, but you can certainly plan one. And that's the best way to get things itemized. And going back to what I was talking about, where you have one person on one side of the table and another on the other side of the table, and they're just not communicating well at all. So a lot of times I will hear facilities say, "We don't have a diabetic diet plan." And in the family's mind, that's kind of absurd.
Yes.
Okay, well, you don't have a generic diabetic diet plan, but you can do things to customize the individual meals in some cases. And so they could certainly take a look at that if it's causing harm. They are right, however, if the resident decides that, the doctor says this is bad for me, but I don't care, well, they certainly have the right to refuse what might be sound medical advice, and they have a right to go against medical advice. So it can get really complicated, especially when, from outside view, you go, well, that doesn't make sense at all that you're doing that. But in some cases, they are correct in following the residents' wishes because they still have legal decision-making power over that. They should be very responsible.
Even with somebody with dementia?
Well, yeah, that's where it gets extra tricky, the folks with dementia. I think one of the things I say is, like, we have education outreach responsibility, right? So just because I have that education and outreach responsibility doesn't mean that I run into a dementia care facility and let everybody know that they have a right to leave. Although legally, they technically do, because they're still, unless they've been adjudicated otherwise, they do have the right. Of course, you'll have medical power of attorneys, and the psychologist has clearly stated that the person can't make their decisions. Again, that's where we get back to the one case-by-case individual systems. One of the other things I hear from facilities sometimes, just as it's what they mean and not so much what they said, but of course the receiver's hearing it in a different way, is, mom has a right to fall. And that it's a horrible thing to say. But what they're saying is that they have a right to be free of restraints. But that's a completely different message that you're sending when you say that. And there's ways that we can work through each of those individual issues if everybody's willing to sit down and talk about it, together. And that's part of what the Ombudsman program does as well.
That's great. I think that's a really needed part of the Ombudsman program. I really do. Because there are a lot of concerns. And I think a lot of times when families, especially when they first go into that assisted living facility or the nursing home, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear on the part of the resident. Oh my gosh, where am I? What's going to happen to me? They, maybe have heard horror stories in the past. They have a view or a vision. And likewise, the family does too. And I've got to advocate, and I've got to take care of mom, and I've got to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And so they come in fist blaring, ready to get into it, and I think sometimes that does cause some of the friction. And likewise, the staff is a lot of times overworked and frustrated, and they're doing the best they can. And when somebody is doing this to them, it just makes them stand back and want to punch back. So I really applaud you for what you do, and for all of the people that work with you and volunteer with you, because I think that is such a needed resource. I can't believe this, Greg, but we are running out of time. We are right at the end. Is there anything else that you want to tell us real quick that you really want to get across to families so that they understand?
Well, I think that expectations are a big thing in that. And one of the things I try to teach to both our volunteers and actually all the ombudsmen, and it goes across all parts of life, kind of an old Dale Carnegie thing. And it's about getting people to want to help you in the first place. And that's a good step along the way, as opposed to, like you said, come in fist blaring and trying to hit them. So in situations where we even have the authority to do certain things, it's not made any easier if we're coming in as an enemy right from the start. So it's good to do what you can to try to get people to help you and work from there. But I would always encourage folks to take advantage of the Ombudsman program, because as you mentioned earlier, we're funded through the Older Americans Act. We're under federal authority. It's a free service to everyone. And we love giving consultations and talking shop, as I say, and hopefully be helpful along the way. And a lot of what we do are just phone conversations, and those are confidential too. And we won't take any action without your permission.
Yeah, that's great. Beth Cleland wanted to say thank you for what you do, Mr. Shelley. Thank you, Beth, for coming on the show today. And I'm going to go ahead and put up the website again so that you can, and Greg, can you find an ombudsman in your area from this website? Are you able to connect with somebody?
That's the Harris County one. And of course, we get you to any other county if necessary. The other easy way to find anyone across the country is the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care. If you Google them, you're going to find any ombudsman program across the country.
Great, great. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day.
My pleasure always, Catherine. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks to everybody for coming on the show today. If you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and add them in the comments. I'll make sure that Greg gets them, and we'll be able to direct you where you need to go to get more help. I'm Catherine Watson, and this is the Life After 50 show. We will be on next Monday with a lady who will be talking to you about life after your job. So if you're over 50 and maybe you've been laid off, or you have ready to change careers, she can help you figure out the next steps. So join us for the program next week and have a great day. Thanks so much.